Welcome to the St. Matthew's Episcopal Church podcast, coming to you from Northern Virginia. We're so glad you're here. Today, we hope our message inspires you to better know and share God's love. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and join our weekly newsletter, The Friday Flash, to stay updated on all of our events and services. Let's dive in.
One of the oldest and most well-rehearsed scripts, thought patterns of my life, and perhaps of yours as well, is the thought pattern of a harsh inner critic. The voice that in some way tells me that I'm inadequate, inefficient, that whatever is going wrong, and in any given moment there's usually something going wrong, that it is my fault. In its simplest form, it is, Rob, you're an idiot. And perhaps you can relate. Both to Rob, you're an idiot, and maybe to own, and maybe the inner voice that tells you that you may be as well. And even though sometimes I may be quick to blame somebody else, I'm blaming as a way of deflecting the inadequacy I feel, and the pain that inadequacy brings to me, and the immediate relief I want. So if I can blame somebody else, that's a way of deflecting that harsh inner critic. And so imagine for a moment that we could live a life free of that inner critic, free of that inner condemnation. That'd be a pretty joyful life, wouldn't it? And that's exactly what the Apostle Paul, one of the earliest followers of Jesus, who started a number of churches, wrote a book to many of those churches, wrote letters to many of those churches, and in the letter that is one of our readings this morning to Romans says, there is no condemnation in Jesus. That's exactly what Paul's talking about, is living a life in such a way, cultivating a life that cultivates joy. That's one of the fruits of the Spirit. Not directly, because joy never comes directly. It comes sort of indirectly from the other things that we're doing. And in this case, joy comes from cultivating a life in which we've learned how to overcome the inner critic. The inner critic may still speak. I've got 67 years of listening to a harsh inner critic. So the inner critic still speaks, and as you'll hear in the story, can still speak with considerable power. But after working on it for many, many years now as a faithful follower of Jesus, I've learned to recognize the voice and quiet the voice more quickly instead of letting it dominate my life and wreck the lives of everybody around me. So that's what we want to look at a little bit more more in depth this morning, is how we can indeed, in Jesus, live a life free from condemnation. And as I said, if you're anything like me, and from talking to many of you, I expect you are, you probably have considerable practice, years and years of practice, years and years of rehearsal in terms of listening to that script, that I in some way am deficient. And so that's going to hold considerable power. So it's not something we're going to get rid of overnight. It's something that's going to take some work, take some time, frankly, take some help. Maybe even some divine help. So when it comes to learning to live beyond living beyond condemnation, the voice of our harsh inner critic, the first thing we need to realize is that sort of all our measures of things, whether ourself or any given experience in our life or our life in general, they're all entirely subjective. They're all relative, right? So if I were to ask you about this room, is this room right now light or dark? Well, we would have, if there's 80 people here, we'd have 80 different answers, right? And it sort of depends. If it was a bright sunny day and you came in from outside, it might seem dark. If you'd been sitting in here for a while, it might seem really light. It's a relative sort of thing. Is this room hot or cold? Right, again, a relative thing. And if you think of it 3 weeks ago with no air conditioning, this probably seems really cold. But if you set your house to 65 and you like it really chilly, this room probably seems hot and humid. It's a relative thing. Is this sermon good or bad? I heard that, Anna. I heard that. And again, if you come from an evangelical tradition, where preachers routinely go on for 45 minutes in an hour, going on for only a half hour, and we're not going to do that today. We're going to keep it under 20 minutes. But that's going to seem like a gift. It's going to seem, well, that's the best sermon I ever heard. If you come from a Roman Catholic church where they preach maybe 5 minutes or maybe not at all, if you go on for even 15 minutes, it's going to seem interminable, like the sermon is a plague worse than death. Again, it's entirely a relative estimation. And we make those estimations based on some reference point. Right? Some reference point, some subjective reference point, that's determining our evaluation. And here's where it gets interesting. Because what we know is that the human brain is designed in such a way that it's always going to or most often going to go to the reference point that makes us feel the worst. Right? We're going to choose the reference point that makes us feel like somebody else is doing better than we are, like we're in some way, shape failing, that we're in some way, shape inadequate. You can think of why that would make sense. In evolutionary history, we didn't need to develop a mechanism that pats us on the back and say, you're doing well, right? But if somebody else was gathering more food than we gathered, well, we needed to pay attention to that because they and their family would thrive where we and our family might starve. You know, they might have the chance to mate all the time. We might never have the chance to mate, and that's only important. And so, in the fact we don't get to pass on our genes. So it's far more important in our evolutionary history to notice what the person next to me is doing, and then that motivates me to do better. But in this world, in our modern world, we're not comparing ourselves to the person next to us, in which case our lives are pretty similar. I can pick out the very best people in the world and compare myself to them. And of course, when I do that, I'm going to feel inadequate. And think about that just for a minute. If we were going to say who is the best at anything, we would probably choose different people for different things. So if I was going to ask the question in some way, shape, or form, who has the best life, I'd say, okay, what does that mean by that? Well, to have a great life, a person needs to have great vision. Who's the person I think who has the greatest vision in our time? This will be controversial, I know, so don't get stuck on this. I might say Elon Musk, right? And I'm not saying anything else about Elon Musk. I'm not saying anything else about, but I mean, he's the one who put electric cars on the map. You know, that took exceptional vision to do that. What he's doing with exploration and, well, what he did with the internet changed everything for a lot of people. What he's doing with that, I mean, just takes exceptional vision. So not saying anything else. You might disagree with that, but I'm going to go with him for the person of greatest vision in the time in which I've lived. I see some eyebrows raised. I expected that. Okay. If I'm going to go with the person who I think maybe has the best life in general, I don't know, maybe I'd go with Brad Pitt. I mean, you know, because he's the best looking person I've ever seen in the world. You know, he seems to have all these super interesting life experiences. He's ultra wealthy. He gets to go wherever he wants and do whatever he wants. And he got to drive Formula One cars for a movie really fast. I mean, maybe I'd choose Brad Pitt. If I choose the person who has the greatest accomplishment of all people, and for you people who didn't like Elon Musk, here we go. Maybe I'll choose Barack Obama, okay? Maybe I'll choose Barack Obama because he's the first black American president, and I don't know that there's any greater accomplishment in the world than becoming an American president. So to do those two things, who has ever accomplished more? So maybe I choose him for that. So the point of this, if I'm choosing the highest for the best of each of these categories and comparing myself to that, the deck is stacked against me because I'm always going to be less than those folks. I'm always going to be failing. I'm always going to be inefficient. And if I just picked one and stuck with one, like if I picked with Elon Musk, okay, maybe he has more vision than anybody else, but he's fathered 11 kids and hasn't married the mother of any of them. So in my estimation, that's a pretty big failure. Right? And so I actually don't want to swap lives with him. And so, yeah, maybe he's better at having vision than me, but I'm better at being a father than he is. And if I can recognize that, then I don't need to feel inadequate. You know, maybe Brad Pitt is the best-looking human being that ever walked this planet. I mean, yeah, maybe. But Brad Pitt's daughter doesn't even want, is, you know, sued to have her name changed because she's so alienated from her father, she doesn't even want her father's name. My daughters, I think, love me. So I may not be able to compete with Brad Pitt on some things, but on some other things, I actually think I'm doing better in life than he is. And so if I could just stick with one person, I have ways to feel good about myself instead of picking this variety of people who always and everywhere are making me feel bad about myself. So that's the first thing to realize. Situations are entirely subjective. We choose reference points, and we evaluate those situations by our reference points. Our reference points are subjective, and they're critical. And so what Paul is suggesting is, rather than these subjective reference points that always make us feel bad about ourselves, that lead us into condemnation, we choose a different reference point, and that reference point is Jesus. Because Jesus gives us a way to let the past be past and to move on into the future. And that turns out to be really important. If what I say to myself is, Rob, you're an idiot, and maybe I've really done some idiotic things, and I have, if I'm an idiot, then of course I'm going to behave like an idiot in the future. Behaving like an idiot is what idiots do. So if the only way I can think of myself as an idiot, I'm going to be an idiot. And I have borne that out at times. If I think of myself as a deficient person, or even take it a step further, as a bad person, right, then I'm going to do bad things, because bad people do bad things. That's what it means to be a bad person. So if this is my identity, if I can't extend my identity beyond that, I'm just going to perpetuate that identity. And what Jesus does in offering us forgiveness is he's saying, it's not that the things that we did don't matter. They do matter. It's not that the things we did don't have a price. They did have a price. I paid that price. But those things don't need to define us. We can put those things behind us so that we can move ahead into a brighter future, so that we're not locked into that identity that our harsh critic tells us we are, and therefore free to love in the way that God's calling us to love. And when we do that, joy will show up. That's how we cultivate joy in our lives. So, we make a reference point, Jesus, and then that gives us a way to silence that inner critic and to accept a new identity for ourselves and find the freedom to escape the bondage of our past and create a better future in which we love well, that's better for everybody. All right. So, how does that actually look in practice? Well, let me give you an example. So, as many of you know, I was on vacation last week with my lovely wife, Linda, and she just turned 7. Oh, am I allowed to say that? Okay, she just turned. I forgot to check that. She just turned 70 years old. I know you'd never know that to look at her. And she's actually 2.5 years older than I am, so she's a cougar. All right? Yeah. You probably didn't know that about her, but she is. So we all went up to a place where we spent a lot of time in the Laurel Highlands. That's southwestern Pennsylvania, the mountains of southwestern Pennsylvania. I grew up there. Our family spent a lot of time vacationing there, made a lot of memories there. And so we went there to celebrate Linda's birthday. And my older daughter, Christine, and Kevin, and my grandson, Finley, joined us. My younger daughter, Mary, and her husband, Scott, joined us. And then for 2 days, my brother, and Matthew, who plays guitar, and his wife, Carla, who does the flowers in the back, they also joined us. And it was just awesome. Well, for the most part, it was awesome. There were also a few moments, one day in particular, where I found myself saying, Rob, you are an idiot, right? And starting to go into that downward spiral. So there were moments that were just glory. I don't want you to think that they were fantastic. There was this. I want you to think they were fantastic. I don't want you to think that it was just one way. There was, for instance, our grandson Finley has just learned to sing the Continent Song, and I don't know if you know the Continent Song, but it's kind of awesome. And it goes. How does it go? Yeah, sing it nice and loud. We are Asia and Africa, North and South America, Antarctica and Europe, finally Australia. Do you know that one, Sabo? That's a great song, isn't it? So we were all driving in the car coming back from one of our activities, and Finley, for some reason, burst into song. And then we all started singing with them. We sang a verse, and then like everybody super got into it. And we rolled all our windows down, and we started singing at the top of our voice. I mean, just absolutely belting it out. And I couldn't see Finley, but Christine said Finley was absolutely beaming. He just put his hand in the little fists, stuck his chest way out, put his head up, and we are Asia and Africa, north and south, and just as, just 100% in the moment. And we were all right there with them. And I mean, that's just glory, friends. I mean, you get even one moment in life like that, and life is good. I mean, wow. But as I said, that wasn't the whole vacation. A day came, and I didn't go into detail at 8, but then somebody after 8 said, so what exactly happened? And I realized that when I don't tell you what happened, that sometimes you fill in the blanks and wonder about the blanks. So let me tell you. So we had planned the week. Meals were always an issue. And we brought 3 families together. Well, 4 families, including my brother. So, actually more than 3. There's my family, Linda's family, Scott's family, Kevin's family, Matthew's family, Carla's family, and then the family that Linda and I formed together, and then the family that Scott and Mary formed together. So you get the point. There's a lot of families coming together with lots of family history and a lot of family dynamics. And if you bring all those families and families' histories together, what do you think is going to happen? Some point there's going to be drama, right? Some point there's going to, and that should be the expectation. To think that you're going to have a perfect vacation, that's probably foolishness. And so, as a way of helping to plan through all that, Christine, my oldest, who is very much an oldest and who is very much like her old man, said, okay, well, let's have, Mary and I, why don't we cook for a night? And so she said, we'll take Wednesday night and we'll make curry. And so Mary and Scott, they said, okay, we'll take Saturday night and we'll make quiche. Well, we get to Saturday morning, and I could have predicted all this, and I should have, and I knew, but it's just hard to learn sometimes. We get to Saturday morning, there's tons of food in the house, right? And so I said, Mary, you don't have to cook. Right? We'll just eat leftovers. And Christine's just went out of the house and said, give me 5 minutes. And like I said, eminently predictable. She came back in and I said, we don't have to talk about it now, but somewhere along the line I'd like to know what I did wrong. I could have told you, but I just sort of wanted her to clarify for me. She said 3 things. I can't remember the second because the first and the last were the ones that really stung. She said, you undermined my independence, and I had this planned out, and you worked against me, and that makes it hard for me to experience my own sense of power and agency. Oh, I mean, wow. But true, right? I mean, true. And then something in the middle, which I can't remember because it wasn't as painful, this one. And then on the end, and then she said, and I realize that objectively circumstances may be differently, the exact word. So, but whenever you rescue Mary, oldest daughter, youngest daughter, whenever you rescue Mary, it just sucks. Right? And objectively, I am sure that is true. And I am sure that what she said was accurate. So my inner critic starts to just say, yep. Rob, what an idiot. Will there ever be a family vacation where you don't poison things? Right? And then I just spiral downward. It's like they're all better off without me. I mean, and literally, you think that for all these, I know better, but I can't help my brain from going there. They're all better off without me. I mean, they don't even care about me. They're just off having fun, and I just always wreck everything, right? And so that's where I've got to put that. I don't know that there's any preventing that, because that's what's practiced and rehearsed. And given the circumstances, there's always going to be points of rupture and conflict. What really matters is what we do next. It doesn't matter what happened here. It matters what happens here. And that's where learning to regulate what's going on inside of us and learning to process through it so that we can move through it relatively quickly to repair and heal. See, that's the skill. And so in that moment, because if I keep on saying to myself, Rob, you're an idiot, then I'm going to keep behaving like an idiot, right? And so what I need to be able to do is to say, you know what? It was eminently predictable that we were going to get here. And in fact, anybody who is in this circumstance is probably going to end up in this place. It's normative. Negative experiences are normative. Perfection is a myth. And so if I can just recognize it and make it normative, that's the first step. And then I can just say, holy cow, it's raining again. No, not that, but I just noticed it was raining again. I apologize. And then if I can just say, Jesus, I know, I'm sorry. If I can just say Jesus, right? Rob, what an idiot you are. I mean, it's like, if I can just say, Jesus doesn't call me an idiot, right? Jesus has made a way for me to get beyond that. My past doesn't have to determine my future. And so, free me, Lord Jesus. Help me to be free of this condemnation. Help me to live the life of the Spirit and to love well. And then I can move through it and stop being an idiot, and we can all get back to loving each other. And actually be a little bit wiser about how we can do that. Be a little bit better about how we can do that. And it becomes a great and glorious thing.
Thank you for listening. If you're in the Northern Virginia area, we invite you to join us for worship or any of our events. For directions, service times, and information about our online services, visit stmtts.org. That's stmtts.org. Until next time, go in peace and share God's love.